I am on the road for a month shooting videography with the A7s, using a Shogun to shoot 4K, Atomos Power Station for extended battery life, Rode mic for scratch track, wireless HDMI output. I just wanted to talk a little bit about my experience with the A7s in this configuration and why I think the A7s is a terrible video camera and is not ideal for video shooting in most situations. So first off, the A7s as is isn't very video ready out of the box. As you can see, for me to get it to where I need it to be, I had to put a cage and just rig the shit out of it. I turned this tiny camera into a much larger camera, so I might as well be using a much larger camera. And for the price point for me to get it to this point, with the Shogun converter, cage, lens mount, battery adapter, and microphone, I am reaching close, somewhat close to being to something of a larger size, like an FS5, which would have way better suited my situation for what I was shooting. To start, I'm going to talk about the power. So the power on this thing is total shit. I'm using the Atomos Power Station. I have had terrible experiences with this thing over the past month. I've only had it 4 to 5 weeks, and it's already crapping out on me. So right here, it's not even registering my second battery. I have not been rough with this at all. I have been using this with a careful hand, very, very slow and steady, being not rough with it at all. The pins are loose. You can actually wiggle these. And this happened about 2 weeks into owning this product. 2 weeks on both sides. The negative and the positive pins are loose. So what'll happen here, so I'll click in battery, we'll just refer to this as battery 1. So I'll click in battery 1, registers a battery, so now we're seeing this one. It's still not reading this one, so I have to wiggle this one. So I'll go ahead and twist it. Okay, now it's reading this. Now it's reading this. But why is that a problem? I'll be in the middle of shooting something, and if this battery dies and it switches to this, and all it takes is a little bump, you see that? Plugging in this battery caused this battery to disconnect. I didn't touch it. I didn't pull it out or anything. It's still clicked in, it's still locked in, but the pins are loose. So in just plugging in one battery, the other battery disconnected. So what I just did there caused the entire thing to shut off. So this is supposed to provide continuous power. So I can hot swap these batteries and still roll on the camera and the monitor. I had this happen at least a fucking dozen times over the summer, and I've corrupted way too many files. That in itself is a pain in the ass. Having this thing, which is supposed to be a reliable continuous power source, just disconnect and cause the camera and the monitor to disconnect. But because the camera power cycles, Sony has an annoying quirk where if the camera power cycles, whether or not it's proper or improper, so if you just eject the battery, the camera does this to me way too often. If the camera power cycles, it will reset your settings. For instance, example, say I spend all night shooting in a specific white balance and I'm shooting in 1080 and I'm shooting at 30 frames per second, and that's my camera for yesterday. Now, I wake up in the morning and I'm shooting a totally different project, and I'm gonna shoot in 4K at 24 frames per second with tungsten, for instance. I boot up the camera, I set it to that while rigging the camera up in the morning, and I go and I set up the shot. Okay, now it's already been an hour after building camera and setting up the shot. I decide to power cycle the camera and switch to a fresh brick. Turning on the camera, all of my settings are reset. It will revert to what it had the day before. It'll revert to 1080, 30 at whatever white balance it was before. Regardless of me setting up the camera in the morning, setting up all these new settings, resetting the camera, resets all the settings. I've had this happen like at least 3 dozen times over the summer. Way too many times. Hand in hand with the camera power cycling, because of this fucking piece of shit, it would power cycle and then reset all of my settings. Okay, so for instance, we're about to slate, roll camera. I roll, and then the camera just shuts off. Okay, hold on, hold the roll, rebooting a camera, reset this piece of shit, get the camera back on, and then all of a sudden all my settings are reset. The resolution's different, the frame rate's different, the white balance is different, and it's like, okay, let's cut. Hold on, I have to reset all of my settings because of this piece of shit, because of this piece of shit, because of this piece of shit. This whole fucking thing is just a piece of shit. I want to throw this fucking thing. I have had so many problems with this over the summer. So another problem that I've been having with this, I'm using the original Shogun 4K recorder, and this is the A camera, A7s, 4K output to here. We've been shooting interviews. This will be used to shoot our subject, and the director wants to see the footage. So you would think I have a wireless HDMI transmitter, I could just plug it into the HDMI out, right? Wrong. I had this thing freeze on me, like completely hard lock, at least 5 times. At first we weren't sure exactly what it was. I just picked this up. I thought, well, maybe it had something with the power source. Maybe the voltage was dropping or fluctuating. But I know that this thing could take varying voltages, so I didn't think it was that. So first we tried putting in, maybe we'll just use the regular power source. Nope, still happened. Maybe we try tapping into the battery with the dummy. Nope, still happened. We tried a couple different variations of what it could be. What I ended up narrowing it down to is the wireless HDMI can't plug directly into the Shogun HDMI out. For some reason, wireless HDMI transmitter into the HDMI out of the Shogun will cause it to hard lock. It doesn't happen immediately. It doesn't happen on a set time frequency. It's not like it happens every 30 seconds or every minute. In like specific intervals, it would just happen. So it might happen maybe 1 interview in, it might happen 3 interviews in. Regardless of how long it would take, it would cause my Shogun to hard lock. The footage would be recoverable up until the point that it froze. So, and because I'm using the A7S1, it's not shooting 4K internal, it's only doing 4K external. Unless I'm noticing it, okay, let me step back. Let me explain what I mean by hard lock. The video feed keeps going, but I notice the audio levels will freeze and the waveform will freeze, but the video feed is still going. So unless I'm paying attention, I will not notice that my recorder has stopped recording. I'm not doing 4K internal. I'm on the A7S1. I can only do 4K output, so I'm outputting it to here. I'm depending on this to record the signal, but I'll be rolling on here and I'll be halfway through an interview, and then I'll notice, wait a minute, why did my audio levels just freeze? Once that freezes, once the audio levels freeze, the recorder has frozen. It is no longer recording the signal. So unless I notice that and cut and tell them, okay, now we have to cut and start, we'll just take it back 1 question and go again. If I didn't notice that, I would have lost everything up until that point. And this happened to me a handful of times. Luckily, I noticed it immediately. I'm sitting there watching my screen. I don't have the audio levels minimized. I have the audio mixer has a cord running into the XLR audio input. We're running audio and video into the device so the editor doesn't have to sync it. So I'm looking at the audio levels, and I noticed immediately, the subject talks, the audio levels go up, and then it just froze. It just stopped, and the waveform stopped. And I thought, what the heck? I've never seen that before. Up until, of course, I had saw it like 5 times in a row because of this piece of shit. And I don't know why. I'm not entirely sure why. I think it has something to do with the power, because this has to be powered. So it's an HDMI powered by the power source coming into here. So I thought maybe it was some kind of power loop, like it can't receive a DC input from the power on this side and a USB power on this side, and it's just receiving 2 power sources. I thought maybe that might be it. So I unplugged the DC, did a power battery brick straight into here. And then it did HDMI output, HDMI transmitter to HDMI out, but it still froze. So it wasn't that. It was powered on both sides. For some reason, powered USB into the HDMI stick, into HDMI out, will cause this to freeze. And then because I can't do HDMI out through the HDMI out, you would think you could, I had to hook on this thing. Luckily we had this because we had a Blackmagic camera as well. This is the Atomos SDI to HDMI converter. So I had the SDI out of the Shogun, convert it to HDMI, and then go HDMI out. So all of this contraption on the back, which is an additional power source and one more thing to turn on, all because I can't do HDMI out. And this became a pain in the ass too. I had to power cycle the camera multiple times, and there would be many times where the director's like, I'm not getting feed. Why am I not getting feed? And I'm thinking, my camera's on, my monitor's on, the stick's on, why are you not getting feed? Oh yeah, I forgot, I'm sorry. I still have to turn this fucking son of a thing on. So now whenever I turn on my camera, I have to turn on the camera, the microphone, the monitor, the converter, turn on the HDMI transmitter, and then I have to make sure the fucking batteries are connecting because this piece of shit stops working. Because if it just twists or turns, gets bumped the wrong way, it just disconnects and turns off. And I had this happen a few times where I'll be rolling and I'm doing a very long take and the camera will just get bumped and then this thing will just disconnect and lose power. In the middle of an interview, middle of a take, middle of something, it'll just fucking disconnect. I know it looks like I'm really torquing it. It looks like I'm really exaggerating how difficult this is, but I'm telling you, it's on a hair trigger. This sucker just fucking turns off. So I'm barely gonna touch it. I'm barely gonna touch it. So this is a fully charged brick. I'm depending on this brick. See, I can't even get it to turn back on now, so I'll go ahead and press it in. I had this happen a dozen times at least. I'm sitting here thinking I have this fucking $500 piece of shit with a battery that's dying. It doesn't matter though. I have this whole thing that I spent money on. 2 large bricks, one's dying, it's continuous power. It's just gonna switch over to this, and it did. I tell you, for the first week, this thing was awesome. I love this thing. I wanna love this thing. After 2 weeks, it stopped working like it was supposed to. This thing would die, it would switch over to this, and then this thing would just stop responding. Yeah, see, sometimes I can get this one to do it. This side isn't as troublesome as this side, but now, yeah, see, now it's not even reading the battery. It's these fucking loose-ass pins. It's such a shitty design. Who the fuck designed this? We have the dock for this. The wireless HDMI has a dock that it sits in so it could take Sony batteries. The pins on that sucker are rock solid. Why is it not solid on this? This thing is going to get way more use than that tiny HDMI transmitter battery. But these things have these cheap pins on it. I hate that. I hate that so much. Daylight white balance, ISO 100. I'm using a battery that is registering as dying, even though a second ago it said it was 75%. So the camera is powered, and I have a brick here that isn't plugged in, a brick here that is plugged in. Again, if for some reason it's not registering the proper charge. So I'm gonna click in a new battery. This is a continuous power station. This should allow me to hot swap, plug in a new battery, and it'll automatically switch to that one after this one dies. It'll keep using this one and plug in that one. It won't skip a beat, everything will stay plugged in. Right? Right, this is how it's supposed to work. But because these fucking pins are loose, I'm gonna plug this one in, it's gonna shake it just that tiny amount, and it's gonna disconnect this battery before the devices can switch to this one, so everything's just gonna shut off. I've had this happen to me so many times over the summer. Click, boom, what? Oh yeah, now you're not even registering as plugged in anymore. Everything power cycled, forgot all of my settings. Now it's 3200, ISO 1000. What the fuck? If I was rolling, all that footage would be corrupted. See, now this fucking thing, this fucking piece of shit, I gotta twist it and torque it until it registers as the battery's even plugged in anymore. Now it says it's 50%. Earlier it said it was fucking dead. Now you're saying you're dead. Oh, so try that again. Try it again, even though you don't remember my settings. But plug in the fucking battery. Oh, yep. Doesn't matter, you're 50%. Doesn't matter. Fucking might as well be fucking powering it with my wishful thoughts. Fucking piece of shit. Worst fucking thing I've ever bought.